someone's phone up here. I'm not sure whose that is. Anyway, it's all good. Is it yours, Arthur? Thank you, mate. All good. Okay, good morning. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rob. I haven't preached here before, so it's a bit of an experience, so we'll see how we go, but I'm sure we'll be fine. Okay, so just a little, not really a word of warning, but just a little thing to add here. I'll bring up my picture. Oh, wrong way. Good start. Okay, so today's message, I'm going to be honest, it's a rerun. Now, I don't know if you've ever, when you were kids, I know when I was a kid, once a week you'd get the listener would arrive at home or the newspaper and you'd open up the page and you'd look for the TV guide. I was big on that, and you look and think, oh great, my favourite TV show's come back. It's been a wee while since I've seen it. Sit down with my dad to watch it, and then you think, this looks familiar. And you go back to the paper and you look at that little wee R in the brackets, which meant repeat, and you'd be like, oh, and you'd sort of suffer your way through it and still watch it, but you wouldn't enjoy it the same. But anyway, I'm looking around the room here, and this was my crowd for when I did this message. Now, this was in the beautiful island in Vanuatu. I was blessed to go on a mission trip over there. Now, I've got two friends here, work colleagues, who know all these people in that photo. But we had an awesome time. And that's the little church there on the right that we preached in. There was no power, so no PowerPoint, nothing like that. Well, it's got lights, but they were, I think, solar power, so they had some lighting. The air conditioning was the windows. You open up the window and hot air blew in. Not really, not cool air. So anyway, I got kind of thrown in the deep end. My workmate there, Toby, came to me on the Friday and said, we're supposed to be preaching today at church. I'm not confident. I said, oh, so you're asking him if I'm confident? He goes, no. So anyway, long story short, I had about an hour to get something together to get up and preach for the opening of Sabbath. But anyway, so that's what I did. So to be honest, it's potentially targeted at my audience there who are 17, 18 years old. But I also got a good bit of feedback from the people who were there at the service as well, which is about 15 or so islanders. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. Well, that's what I'm going to share with you today. So the topic today, I've given it a fancy name. When I preached it the first time out, it didn't have all these fancy titles and headings, so there you go. So it's called the 3 W's of worship. So what I'm looking at today is how we can best worship. So why, who, and basically when we should be worshipping. So hopefully this makes sense as we go along. Now, I've got a couple of personal stories in here to share as well, so hopefully you can kind of make the connections there where I'm getting at with those. So, now I kind of got, Monique sort of blurted out a while back that I like cricket during a meeting that we had here, and some of you will be here for that, to remember that. Now, this is my, I won't say claim to fame because it's a bit weird, but that's actually me up there, not the guy with the bat walking off the field proudly who's just scored the winning runs for Canterbury. That's me in that crazy king suit outfit. Now, my passion and one of the things I really love is cricket, and I can't disguise that, hide that, and anyone who knows me, even remotely, will know that. So that was a little job I did. I got paid for doing this. I got free tickets to the cricket. I got to meet a lot of the players, and I still say good day to a few of them even now. So I did that for about 6 or so years. So that's my background and my main claim to fame in cricket. I used to play, but not to any great standard. But anyway, I did my best. So that's me. So one day I had epiphany is quite a big word, so I won't say it too often because it's hard to pronounce. I realised one day I was worshipping the wrong thing. Now it came in quite a late stage in my life, and I'm going to share that story today. So some of you might know who that is. I don't really need to share, but this is the person that I worship. And I am legit about this from the age of about 10 to when I was about 20. Now, sometimes when you talk about sports people around the world, I actually had my son the other day sent to a message, and him and my brother were debating the 5 greatest NBA basketball players of all time. I kind of stay clear because I don't really know enough about that. For this, there's no dispute. This man is New Zealand's greatest ever cricketer, and it's without a doubt. So, as a young person, I spent a lot of time at Lancaster Park watching cricket. He played for Canterbury, he played for New Zealand, and I was just, this guy inspired me to play cricket, inspired me to follow cricket, and yeah, so this person shaped my life. Now that sounds terribly like, that shouldn't be right. You should have had someone else in your life, and I did, but probably not as much as this person. Now, this is my long story. I'll try to keep the story short. This is when this came crashing down. I used to drive I was a courier driver for a little while. This was about 2001, 2002. And I was just driving along one day, minding my own business, and my cell phone rang. Answered the cell phone, and it was my dispatch operator back at the office. Oh, hey, Rob, hope not too busy. We've got a new customer for you. I was like, oh, yeah, cool. Whereabouts are they? And she gave me the address and blah, blah, blah. And she said, you might want to take your autograph book with you. I was like, that's a random thing to say. This was the customer. I just about drove off the road. I was like, man, I've waited all this time. I'm now a 31-year-old man. I shouldn't be this excited. But, I was. And so anyway, I finished off the rest of my run and got to his place. It was out in Avonhead. That was my sort of area. I got out there, pulled into his driveway, and the biggest disappointment just swept over me. He already had the parcels and the freight out waiting to be picked up. So he just at his front doorstep. So when I went and just picked them up, hopped in the van and drove away. I was like, oh, so disappointed. It was like, here was my chance. We were going to be leaning on his door and we were going to be yarning and chatting, and, I could have gone inside for a Coke, or, it was going to be amazing. It didn't happen. But I thought to myself, hang on, he's got all his courier tickets on the parcels, he's obviously got books, and he's got plans of being, another pickup. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, got it on my little pager this time. Back in the day we had pagers, not sort of text and that. So anyway, got the pager, pick up, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, awesome. So I broke every courier driver rule ever out there to get there quick. So I was at the start of my run. I'm just going to drive straight from here. And just Pendleton in a straight line and get there. I'm going to beat them. Hopefully there weren't people sitting there for something medical or whatever from from the courier driver, because I was off. So I got there. This time as I pulled in, I could see nothing outside his house. I'm like, oh, I've made it. Now this is where it gets really embarrassing. I took my hat off, and I looked in the mirror, and I went like this, because I had hair back then, a lot more. Straightened my hair, made sure it looked really good, and put my hat back on. It's like, why did I do that for? But anyway, got there, knocked on the door. All of a sudden, it dawned on me, what do I say? I hadn't actually thought about that. I'm going to meet this person who is so, important to me that I hadn't really thought ahead. So I knock. Just as the door's about to open, I come up with a question. And I thought, oh, this is going to be amazing. He's going to be like, whoa, this guy, I want to be this guy's friend. Anyway, door opens, and there he is. He's standing right there, like, a metre away. I'd got his autograph before as a kid, but there's thousands of us just throwing bits of paper at him, and he was just scribbling and whatever. Now it's me, him, standing there. And now I could have been in that situation. Could either be overawed and say nothing, or the opposite and say too much. Unfortunately, I was the latter. Anyway, I said, "Oh, good afternoon, sir. I'm just here to pick up your parcels." He goes, "Man, that was quick." Because I only just got off the phone. He said, "I don't know how you got here so quick." And I could tell that he was impressed. And I'm like, yes. Now, smart person would have left it and thought, okay, I've done really well. He's impressed. We're going to be besties and it's going to be awesome. But no, I thought up this question. I'm going to ask it anyway. And when you have those conversations where you say something to somebody, you get halfway through the sentence and you all of a sudden think, oh, can I rewind that? That's not coming out right. So at the time, he'd retired from cricket and he was the head selector for the New Zealand cricket team. So he made the final calls and all the big calls. And as I asked him, I thought, what am I asking this question for? One, I knew the answer to the question because I knew enough about cricket to know the answer. And two, the question was insulting to his intelligence. And I asked it anyway. And he stood there and he kind of looked at me with this look of, disappointment, sort of, and not anger, but he was kind of looking at me like, huh? Anyway, he answered the question and he answered in quite a surly sort of way, and then he kind of said, I'll go and get the freight for you. And I was like, okay. And I walked back to my van. I was like, what am I doing, you idiot? Anyway, so I opened up my van door and he came out and he'd stacked up his parcels. And I was chatting away. I can't remember what I was chatting about, probably the weather or something, boring. And we got back onto cricket. I say we got back onto cricket. I got back onto talking about the cricket. I was talking away. All of a sudden I heard his front door shut. And I was like, wind must have blown it shut. And I carried on talking to myself. He'd gone back inside. And I was like, that's even worse than the first part where I messed up. And so that was it. That was my encounter with the person I'd spent all my life, adoring and worshipping and just wanting to meet and wanting to talk to. I messed it up. And I just hopped in the van and I slumped in my seat and I drove back to the depot. And I got home later on and my wife said to me, so how was your day today? And I said, I got to meet this guy. And she's like, oh, wow, that must have been so amazing for you. And I was like, well, actually. And we managed to have a laugh about it. Because when I think back now, it's one of those funny things that happen in your life that you kind of think, what was that about? Anyway, so after that long-winded story there, that's when I had my epiphany and I realised the importance that we worship the right things and worship the right person, I'm going to say. That's probably the best way to say that. So often in life, always in life, anything that we put our faith and trust and hope in is probably going to let us down. Now that's not because this guy was a rude, arrogant person, because he's not. I don't know, probably he's having a bad day, but he's human. Okay? So no human that we put our faith and trust in is always going to be there for us and always going to be that person that can help us and save us. Now, I kind of got this message from something I spotted with my kids when I was on the Vanuatu trip that I showed you before. And it's funny because the same thing came up today during Sabbath school, and I'll talk about that as well briefly, which shows me this is probably something I could be talking about today, which is going to be helpful for us. So it's really important to remember, we sometimes get that feeling that what we worship has to have a face, or it has to have a personality, or it has to, be something that we can interact with. Not always the case either. We can get hung up on all sorts of things. Anyway, I'll come back to that shortly. So, this is the teacher in me possibly coming out here. Now, I always like to start a lesson when I do a new topic with a definition. That way we can kind of get to the bottom of it and we can kind of build and go from there. So worship, the top one there, once again being all teachery, that's the noun for worship. So the feeling or expression of reverence and adoration. And the verb, which is the doing, of course, is to show reverence and adoration for. So this is where the worship thing comes in, I talked about before. So I noticed when I'd been given this little task to preach at my little Vanuatu trip, I'd noticed something that the kids there were absolutely hooked on. And I can imagine you can all think about what it is, and we've probably all got one in our pocket. It's these little guys. Now we had, it was hilarious. We had, because we were on an island with no power, recharging those was a real challenge, and it was hard because we only had one little solar power unit at the little chief's house we were staying in. So Edra had provided a generator there for our film guy to be able to charge up his filming equipment. And one night we were allowed access to it, so all the kids grabbed their phones and it was like a stampede to this generator and they're plugging in. There was like 20 phones all lined up with cords and things, and the poor old generator was whirring away, probably like, what the heck is happening to me? Anyway, long story short, I recognised that these kids were glued to these. Now, I'm sure that some of us in here are going, oh, that's terrible, whoa, what are we doing? As we said, Judy, I think you brought up today in Sabbath school. Judy talked about having to make a conscious effort that we don't always have this thing hanging around next to us and whatever. So it can be any little thing that we're doing this for. So worship and adoration for our phones. As weird as that sounds, that could be something that we're worshipping which isn't good. So jump onto some quick verses there. So who? Now, as I put there, that's pretty obvious, right? We all know we should be worshipping God and we should be worshipping Jesus. And it shouldn't be difficult, but I'm sure if I ask for a show of hands, sometimes we do find that difficult. So the verses I've got there, if you want to follow along, I'm not going to read them all out, but I've got them just written down here. So Matthew 4:10, it's when Jesus was being tempted by Satan in the desert. He says, "Get out of here, Satan," Jesus told him, "for the scriptures say, you must worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Once again, pretty simple. And then we've got Exodus 20, verse 3 to 5 there. "You must not have any God but me. You must not make idols images. You must not bow down to them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God who will not tolerate." Now, I've kind of cut that one a bit short. There's a bit more to that if you wanted to follow that along. And then finally there, John 4, 23, 24. "Time is now when true worshippers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. The Father is looking for those." So what we're basically saying there, God is the only one worthy of worship. So not our dollars, not celebrities, definitely not celebrities, not politicians. Once again, I was having a chat there with Mike this morning about politicians. They're definitely not someone that we should worship. But once again, not because they're not nice people or they don't know what they're doing, they're flawed people, as we know. Romans 3:23, we've all sinned and fallen short. So they're people that aren't worthy of our worship. And as I said before, it doesn't have to be a person, it can be a thing, it can be something that we're interested in or a hobby. So next little slide there. So we've got why. So just as obvious, and it probably should be, so he constantly performs miracles for us. He provides for us. He carries us. He loves us. But once again, we let ourselves down with believing these sorts of things, like the Bible says. So my examples here. So we've got fall of Adam and Eve. So some of you might think, oh, what's that got to do with, worshipping or being distracted or whatever? We can all remember what Eve was told by the serpent in the Bible. He basically said to her, you and Adam, if you eat this fruit, are going to become basically as smart as God. And they craved that wisdom. They wanted that power. They wanted that knowledge. They wanted to be all-knowing like God was. They weren't accepting, and they were kind of, I think, idolising or worshipping that power and that knowledge. I don't know about you guys, but they had it pretty sweet. God coming down to visit them and walking in the garden with them, and I'm sure they could have asked them whatever they wanted to, but they still chose to worship that for themselves. Now the last one's there. Now this also, I thought Pastor Mike was going to steal my stuff last week when he started talking about Israelites escaping from Egypt. So we've got the verses there. So we've got Exodus 12:14, which basically covers the escape from Egypt, where they were being ruled over. The pillar of cloud and fire Exodus chapter 13, 21, 22. We look at the Red Sea parting. So my thoughts there, those guys, they had all of these miracles just happening in front of them. You know, how could you get that wrong? I don't know about you, but if I was somewhere and someone like a leader said, "Hey guys, we're going to go down to," I'll use Lake Linden as the example. I was just there actually the last 3 days. Beautiful lake. Hey, to get across, I'm just going to stand here and put my arms up. The lake's going to, split apart, and you're just going to wander across and get to the other side. Who would think that was pretty cool? Yeah, I'd think, wow, this guy is somebody else. So they had Moses there performing these miracles, and yet they still messed up. So the other things I haven't got actually on there, we looked at, Pastor Mike talked about manna from heaven and the quails and the water from the rock. So, what could go wrong? So, once again, I stole this little heading from a work colleague she shared the other day during staff worship. She talked about the great golden calf debacle. So I'm confident that we all know what the golden calf debacle was. So we had Moses went up Mount Sinai, went up to chat to God to he basically was picking up the commandments. He was up there for 40 days. Not sure how long it took him to get up there. I think Mount Sinai is about 2,300 metres to get up there. So I can imagine Moses having to hack his way up there. He wouldn't have had any sort of dock paths to walk along nicely. So he probably got a job to get up there. Got up there and he spent 40 days up there. So what the golden calf represents, I've done a wee bit of reading about this. A lot of people kind of have different views, and I know my workmate Evie said the same thing, and she talked about the guy that she'd been listening to on a podcast was kind of saying, he felt that the golden calf was there to represent God, and that was their way of, worshipping God and whatever. So that's one sort of theory, but there's quite a few. My theory is, excuse me, when you read the scriptures there about Moses, it says that God was angry. Now we know that God wanted to smite them and destroy them and burn them and do all this kind of stuff. And old Moses had to kind of negotiate. I can just picture Moses sitting up there with God, and he had to sort of say to God, look, how about we give him a chance? Or how about we just don't get so carried away and just hold the smiting till later on. So anyway, so the guys, they're down there, they've made this golden calf, and God says to Moses, right, it's time for you to get your butt back down there and sort this out. So Moses has got his tablets, and off he goes. Now I can kind of picture Moses just going down the hill, just shaking his head, like reading the commandments. He's like, I can understand how they could have stolen something, or I understand how they could have coveted, or they could have, been telling lies and all these things on there. How could they possibly have broken these ones after everything that they've seen? So he gets back down there. Now I find it kind of amusing too. The guy he had left in charge was his brother. Now who has brothers in here? Quick show of hands. I know I've got 2 brothers. If I'd got down there and it was one of my brothers who'd messed up like this, I don't know, I wouldn't have been very happy. Both my brothers are bigger than me now, so I probably wouldn't be able to do much about it. But you know what I'm saying? The fact that it was your own brother, and he pretty much owned up to it. He said, I got them all to donate me their gold rings, and I melted them down, and we've made this calf. So they've decided, because he took so long to come back down, they wanted to worship something else and to thank this calf for their escape. So that's the reason there. The calf or bull signalled power and fertility. So once again, that sort of wanting that power comes back again. So as I said, God wasn't happy, considered swift punishment. Okay, so why am I sharing these? I think sometimes in our life, we're waiting for those miracles in our life. We're expecting great, big, massive things to happen. And they don't come like that. I'd love it. As I said before, I'd love to be able to see miracles like that. But I think our miracles often come in different shapes and different forms. I think back to when, just another little quick story, when I was younger, I was 19. And I hadn't really had a full-time job yet. I left school in 1987. Of course, those of you who follow news, 87 was the year of the big stock market crash. And I know when I applied for jobs, there was 300 other 18-year-olds applying for jobs. So I didn't really get a proper full-time job until I was 19. And that job was a terrible job. It was one I didn't really want to do. I knew I wouldn't be any good at it. It was making aluminium windows. Now, I was never any good with my hands. That wasn't my thing. I gave it a go anyway. Didn't end well. It was back in the days before we had work contracts and whatever. I had the boss just basically come down the back of the room one day, called me all sorts of names, told me all sorts of things, See you later. So anyway, he gave me 3 days to carry on. I don't know why I spent 3 days after that. But anyway, I lost my job on the Friday. My family was in between shifting house, and we had all of our personal belongings packed up at this close personal family friend's house. And my daughter of my friend was very, enthusiastic, I'll say, enthusiastic. She goes, right, we're going to get you a job. I'm like, awesome. I've been unemployed pretty much for, 20 months, but yeah, sure, let's do it. So she got the newspaper out, and we were rummaging through the back of this newspaper. She came across this little ad, and I'm not exaggerating, it wasn't even like one of the big ones they put in there. It was about that, and about that. She goes, here's one for you. Right, okay. She goes, right, we're going to get your CV, and we're going to write you a letter, and we're going to get this job for you. I was like, okay, cool. Of course, back in the day, my CV was buried at the bottom of my mum's glory box, which was an old sort of cabinet thing you opened up, and right at the bottom, on top of it was a fridge and a thing and stuff, and basically our house belongings were on top of this glory box. My dad and his mate got a jack out, and they jacked up the lid, and they dig around, and they finally found my CV, and I took a photocopy, and we sent this letter away on the Saturday. I was lying in bed on the Monday, so this is a weekend after I'd been booted out of this last job. The phone rang. I went and answered it. It was this lady said, oh, can you come in for a job interview? I was like, whoa, okay, that was quick. Postal service back then was obviously doing its job. Went in for a job interview on Tuesday. I started the job on the Thursday. This was 6 days after I'd lost my job at the previous place. My head was still spinning that I'd even got a job interview. But anyway, a miracle. That was a miracle. As a 19-year-old, I was like, yeah, cool, okay, I got a job. At church on that Sunday, after I'd started at the job, I had this lady from church come, oh, I can't believe you got a job, Bob. She said, me and my ladies group on Tuesday night, we prayed for 20 minutes or something that you'd get a job. And it happened on the Thursday. And it was just like, isn't God good? And I'm sure if I asked you all personally, there'd be a little story like that you could say, well, actually, yeah, God is worth worshipping because God is doing the stuff for me that I probably aren't even really considering and thinking about. So just little things that we need to really, really appreciate. So my last little point, okay, so I was biting there off my slides, that's all right. So do we expect Red Sea miracles in our life? Are we missing real miracles waiting around for these ones? What are the little things that we have happening in our life that we just often put down to, oh, what a coincidence. Oh, gee, that was lucky. Oh, well, aren't you tinny? Well, no, that's not the case. Okay, it's God working in our lives. And we need to recognise that. So our challenge is to worship God for what He does provide, however small we may think it is. Okay, this time. So now we're on to our last one. When. Once again. That's easy, isn't it? Always. Right? We should always worship. So once again, I was driving in the school van yesterday, coming back from Lake Linden, and as happens when you're in a car full of teenage girls, they hijacked the radio. I was just sitting there, all of a sudden music's playing. They've got their, they had something. They asked me first, of course, because that's what I do. They said to me, "Can we play some music, Mr. G?" I said, "As long as it's, there's no language or no whatever's in it." And so, of course, the first song that they had on their playlist was the song called Praise. Now, I'm not sure if some of you know it. I don't know if we've sung it here. We sing it at school all the time. And the very first line says, praise in the valley, praise on the mountain. Now, those words come and go like just so easy, okay? Praise on a mountain. Yeah, that's real easy to do. And I'm sure we all know what it means to pray in a valley. So Psalm 23 verse 4, even when I walk through the darkest valley, I will not be afraid, for you are close beside me. And of course that's different wording for the, yea, though I walk through the shadow of the valley of death. And then we've got Psalm 34 verse 1. By the way, Psalm was full of these. If you want more, just go to Psalms about valleys and hills. You'll find plenty. Psalm 34 verse 1. I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. And as I said, that's when the little song came into my head as well. How easy is it to praise and worship when we're on the mountain? Not so easy when we're in a valley. I can remember, once again, going back to my own little story. I graduated from university. I went to university quite late in life. I was 40 when I went to study. I spent 4 years at university, which was, as an adult, was quite hard, I'll be honest, and it had its challenges. The biggest challenge, though, was leaving that job, graduating from my uni, and I didn't get a job for a year. I was like, man, I've put in all this work, got my degree, I sacrificed 4 years of earning money for my mortgage and family and whatever, and here I am, no job. And it was frustrating. Now, of course, I think my worship kind of stopped then too, for a while. It was like, I just got so disgruntled and so frustrated. But that is the time when we should be worshipping. Now, as I said, I would never preach something that I don't struggle with myself. And this is something that I do struggle with. And it's something that I do need to work on, and I am totally aware of that. It is so easy, and I'm sure, without judging, a lot of you out there are the same. We don't have that desire to worship when things aren't going well. And I think that's totally natural. But as I said, God tells us to do that, to praise in the valley. Another little story, I lost my dad a few years back, which was really tough. But yeah, so once again, I could have been worshipping then, and it was just, I let things get to me. And I know for a fact that if I'd just opened my heart up and worshipped at that tough time, things would have been great. Because 6 months earlier, I got the phone call to go to the hospital because we were losing Dad, and went down there and he was all plugged up to things, and they were breathing for him. And I can remember sitting with my sister for 2 hours, just hugging each other and just sitting there. And miraculously, Dad came right, and that was great. That was easy to worship then. Wow, we got Dad back. Fantastic. Awesome. Praise God. When the opposite happened, it's tough, and it's totally understandable. But that's my challenge for us today, is to just make the effort to worship in those times when it's awful and when it's hard. Okay, what was it? Going to get political again. JFK said something about when they were doing the moon missions. He said, we don't want to go to the moon because it's easy or something. We do it because it's hard. Okay, and that's when we really need to step up and to really put in the effort. Finally, my last little verse here I've got, and this I think some of you might have actually worked out where I might have been leading for this last point. Okay, so we've got Job chapter 1 verse 20. So as we know, I know Pastor Eunice did a really good message on this a couple of years back that I sat and listened to. Job was a wealthy dude. They reckon he was the richest guy in his area where he lived. He had things going just sweet. He had big family. He had cattle. He had everything he could possibly have wished for. But as we know, that soon got taken away. So, Job chapter 1, verse 20. So let's find it in my Bible here. I want to get this part right. So we've got Job. He's just found out that he's basically lost everything. When I say everything, there's his camels, his donkeys, his sheep, cows, servants. That was bad enough. But of course he loses his 10 kids as well, who are in a house that got blown over and destroyed. This sums up what I want to say today. And as I said, this is my challenge for me and also for you as well. So Job chapter 1:20. It doesn't say Job then went outside and kicked over his garden shed and yelled at his wife and, threw the cat across the paddock. That wasn't there. It says, Job stood up and tore his robe in grief. No big deal. He had plenty of shirts, I'm sure, because he was pretty wealthy and pretty understandable. Then he shaved his head and he fell to the ground to worship. So that last part there is the bit that we really need to focus on. He fell to the ground to worship. Now I can remember as a young kid, we used to have Bible challenges. Go home and you've got to read the book of whatever, and we'd devour it and we'd get back to junior soldiers and we'd have questions and whatever. And I could always remember thinking, this guy's nuts. What's going on here? What is wrong with this dude? He's just lost everything. Anyway, so he shaved his head, fell to the ground to worship. And he said, I came naked from my mother's womb, and I'll be naked when I leave. The Lord gave me what I had, and the Lord has taken it away. Praise the name of the Lord. Now, I seriously mean this. I'm hoping that none of us here ever have to even suffer a hundredth of what Job suffered. I just can't imagine the loss that man suffered from. But yet, he still got down, excuse me, and he worshipped the Lord. Now, I recognise that if you've read Job, things get a bit pear-shaped here and there later on, and we're not going to worry about those for now. But his first reaction, and as I said, blows me away, and I'm hoping you guys have the same reaction. His first instinct was to praise the Lord. So my prayer for us all today is that we continue to pray and worship and praise the Lord in all situations and all times. Thank you. Oh, you want me to pray? Oh, cool. Awesome. I said the word. Just pray before we go. Dear Lord Jesus, we just thank you for everything that you do for us. And I just thank you for the times that you've carried us, the times that you've provided for us. Even though we haven't really realised it and haven't really appreciated it and haven't really cared about it. But Lord, I just know that you will continue to do so, no matter how much we worship or praise you. But Lord, I just pray that today that we'll take it upon ourselves to continually praise and to worship you and just to thank you, Lord, for all that you've done. Be with us today, Lord, for the rest of the Sabbath, and keep us all safe until we meet again next week. Amen.